At Grandpa's 90th birthday party, my husband grabbed my arm and whispered urgently, "We're leaving now. Something is very, very wrong." I thought he was overreacting to family drama. When I discovered what he'd noticed, I realized my entire family had been lying to me for months, and Grandpa's celebration was actually a cover for something that could have destroyed our lives. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla from Grandma Rosalind's famous apple cake was still warm in the air when my husband Marcus leaned close to my ear and whispered the words that shattered what I thought was going to be a perfectly ordinary family gathering. "Valentina, we need to leave, right now. Don't look around, don't make a scene, just gather our things and follow my lead." I was sitting in the overstuffed burgundy armchair in the corner of Grandpa Benedetto's living room in Millbrook Heights, our 2-year-old daughter Sophia sleeping peacefully in my arms after finally exhausting herself from running around with her cousins. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the lace curtains that Grandma Rosalind had hung 40 years ago, casting intricate shadows across the hardwood floors that Grandpa had installed with his own hands back when his arthritis was just a minor ache instead of the constant companion it had become. "What?" I whispered back, confused. "Marcus, we literally just finished singing Happy Birthday. I haven't even had cake yet." But when I looked at his face, really looked at it, my stomach dropped. Marcus Thornfield wasn't the type to panic. In our 8 years of marriage, I'd seen him handle a kitchen fire with the calm of a seasoned firefighter, talk aggressive dog away from Sophia with the patience of a saint, and navigate his mother's passive-aggressive commentary about our parenting choices with diplomatic grace that would make career politicians jealous. He was steady, rational, the kind of man who made pro and con lists before buying a new coffee maker. Right now, his olive complexion had gone almost gray, and there was a tension in his jaw that I'd only seen once before, the night his father had his heart attack, and we'd spent 14 hours in the emergency room waiting to hear if he'd make it through surgery. "Something is very wrong here," he said, his voice barely audible above the cheerful chatter of my extended family. Uncle Salvatore was telling my cousin Isabella about his latest fishing expedition to Lake Winnebago, complete with exaggerated hand gestures and his signature booming laugh. Aunt Francesca was organizing the gift table with military precision, making sure each present was positioned just so for the photo session she'd planned. My mother, Elena, was fluttering around the kitchen with my sister Carmen, fussing over whether the pasta salad needed more oregano. Everything looked exactly as it should for a milestone birthday celebration. 73 members of the Moretti family had descended upon Grandpa Benedetto's modest ranch house in Millbrook Heights from as far away as Portland and Miami. The walls were covered with photos spanning 9 decades. Grandpa as a young man in his Navy uniform, his wedding day with Grandma Rosalind, Christmas mornings with their 4 children, graduations, weddings, baptisms, and countless Sunday dinners around the massive oak table he'd built in his workshop. The house was filled with the warm chaos that only comes from an Italian family gathering. Conversations in 3 languages happening simultaneously, children weaving between adults with sticky fingers and chocolate-stained shirts, the constant sounds of laughter, good-natured arguments about whose marinara recipe was superior, and the gentle scolding of grandmothers trying to feed everyone until they couldn't move. "Marcus, you're scaring me," I said, shifting Sophia to my other arm. She stirred slightly but didn't wake, her tiny fist curled around a piece of my dark hair. "What could possibly be wrong? It's Grandpa's birthday party. Look around. This is the most normal, boring family gathering in the history of family gatherings." He was already reaching for our diaper bag, his movements careful but urgent. "I need you to trust me on this one, Val. Don't ask questions, don't look around, just get Sophia's things and walk with me to the car. We can talk about it once we're away from here." Away from here? Away from my grandfather's 90th birthday party? "Marcus, are you having some kind of breakdown? Did your blood sugar drop? When was the last time you ate something?" But even as I was asking these questions, trying to find a rational explanation for his behavior, I was also studying his face. This wasn't low blood sugar or social anxiety or even one of his rare migraine headaches. This was fear. Real, genuine fear. The kind that made your hands shake and your breathing shallow. Marcus had grown up in a military family. His father had been a colonel in the army, and Marcus had spent his childhood moving from base to base, learning to read situations and people with the hypervigilance that comes from constantly adapting to new environments. He told me once that military kids develop a sixth sense about danger, an ability to sense when something isn't quite right, even when everything appears normal on the surface. I'd always thought it was just an interesting quirk of his personality, the way he'd pause in doorways to scan a room, how he always chose seats with clear views of exits, and how he could spot trouble brewing in a crowded restaurant before anyone else even noticed the tension. But I'd never seen him look genuinely frightened before. "Okay," I said quietly, beginning to gather our things, "but you owe me an explanation the second we get in the car." He nodded, relief flooding his features. "Thank you. I promise I'll tell you everything." I stood up slowly, trying not to wake Sophia, and started moving toward where we'd left her stroller near the front door. The house was laid out in a classic 1960s ranch style. You entered into a small foyer, with the living room to the right, kitchen straight ahead, and a hallway leading to the bedrooms branching off to the left. The living room, where the party was centered, was spacious, but not huge, probably designed for a nuclear family rather than the small army that had gathered today. As I walked, I tried to see what Marcus was seeing. Uncle Salvatore was still entertaining Cousin Isabella with his fishing stories, gesturing wildly with a piece of birthday cake balanced precariously on his fork. My teenage nephew Marco was showing his girlfriend pictures on his phone while she giggled and whispered in his ear. Great Aunt Teresa was holding court near the mantelpiece, telling anyone who would listen about her recent hip replacement surgery and how the physical therapy was killing her slowly but surely. Aunt Francesca had indeed taken charge of the gift situation and was now directing my cousin Tony to adjust the lighting for what I could only assume would be a professional quality photo session. My mother and sister had emerged from the kitchen carrying platters of food, antipasto, bruschetta, and what looked like enough pasta to feed half of Millbrook Heights. Near the back patio doors, a group of my male cousins were engaged in their traditional heated debate about football, specifically whether the Chicago Bears had any chance of making the playoffs this year. Their voices carried the passionate intensity that comes from discussing something that ultimately doesn't matter, but feels like life or death in the moment. I saw my father, Giuseppe, deep in conversation with my uncle Antonio near the fireplace. They were speaking in low tones, occasionally glancing toward the kitchen where Grandpa Benedetto was holding court with some of his older grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days when he'd first immigrated from Sicily with nothing but a suitcase and a head full of dreams. Everything looked normal, beautifully, chaotically normal. But as I continued moving toward the front door, trying to look casual while my heart hammered against my ribs, I started paying attention to things I hadn't noticed before. Like how my father and Uncle Antonio kept glancing toward the windows, as if they were watching for something. Like how Aunt Francesca's military precision with the gift table seemed less about perfectionism and more about positioning. Like how several of my cousins kept checking their phones, not in the mindless scrolling way people usually did, but with the focused attention of people waiting for specific information. And then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Every single adult in the room, every single one, had positioned themselves between the children and the exits. It was subtle, so subtle that you'd never notice unless you were specifically looking for it. But once I saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. Uncle Salvatore wasn't just entertaining Isabella with fishing stories, he was standing directly in front of the sliding door that led to the backyard. Aunt Francesca's gift table organization had her positioned perfectly to block the hallway to the bedrooms and the back door. My father and Uncle Antonio's conversation spot gave them clear sightlines to both the front door and the kitchen entrance. Even my mother and sister, emerging from the kitchen with their platters of food, had arranged themselves in a way that created a natural barrier between the living room and the front of the house. Marcus was right. Something was very, very wrong. I reached the stroller and began quietly transferring our things from around the room. Sophia's jacket from the back of a chair, her favorite stuffed elephant from the coffee table where she'd abandoned it during her pre-nap sugar rush, the sippy cup that had somehow migrated to the windowsill. Each movement felt deliberate and dangerous, like I was defusing a bomb rather than collecting toddler accessories. Valentina! My mother's voice rang out from across the room, bright and cheerful and somehow too loud. Where are you, sweetheart? You haven't had any cake yet, and Grandpa was just asking about little Sophia. He wants to give her his special birthday blessing. Every head in the room turned toward me. Every conversation paused. The sudden attention felt like being caught in searchlights, and I had to fight the urge to freeze completely. Oh, just getting some fresh air, I managed, hoping my voice sounded more casual than it felt. Sophia's been a little fussy. I think she might be getting a tooth. We'll just step outside for a minute. Grandpa Benedetto's weathered face lit up with concern from his position near the kitchen. Ah, the little angel is teething. Bring her to Nano. I have just the thing. A little whiskey on the gums, like we used to do in the old country. The room erupted in gentle laughter and good-natured protests about outdated parenting techniques, but I noticed that the laughter sounded forced, and the adults were still positioned in their strategic locations. That's so sweet, Grandpa, but I think we just need some air, I said, continuing toward the door. Marcus had moved to intercept me, taking the stroller handle and positioning himself slightly in front of both Sophia and me. Grandpa Benedetto's weathered face lit up with concern from his position near the kitchen. Ah, the little angel is teething. Bring her to Nano. I have just the thing. A little whiskey on the gums, like we used to do in the old country. The room erupted in gentle laughter and good-natured protests about outdated parenting techniques, but I noticed that the laughter sounded forced, and the adults were still positioned in their strategic locations. That's so sweet, Grandpa, but I think we just need some air, I said, continuing toward the door. Marcus had moved to intercept me, taking the stroller handle and positioning himself slightly in front of both Sophia and me.
Wait, wait! Aunt Francesca called out, abandoning her gift table and moving toward us with surprising speed for a woman in her 60s wearing heels. Before you go, we absolutely must get a 4-generation photo. Grandpa, his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. When will we have this opportunity again? More murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, and suddenly I found myself surrounded by well-meaning relatives, all insisting that we couldn't possibly leave before the official photo session, that this was a once-in-a-lifetime moment, that surely whatever was wrong with Sophia could wait just a few more minutes. But Marcus stepped forward, his voice polite but firm. That sounds wonderful, and we definitely want to be part of it. How about if we step outside for just a moment to get Sophia settled, and then we'll come right back in for photos? The room went quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, heavier, more dangerous. Uncle Salvatore spoke first, his booming voice suddenly much quieter. Actually, Marcus, maybe it would be better if you stayed inside. You know how these family photos go. Once we start moving people around, it takes forever to get everyone organized again. Plus, added Cousin Tony, it looks like it might rain. Those clouds have been building all afternoon. I glanced toward the windows. The sky was perfectly clear, brilliant blue without a cloud in sight. That's when Marcus made his move. You know what? You're absolutely right about the photos. Let me just put this stuff in the car first so we don't have to worry about it during the pictures. He was already walking toward the front door, pushing the stroller with one hand and carrying our diaper bag with the other. I followed, Sophia still sleeping peacefully in my arms, completely unaware that her nap time was about to become the most terrifying moment of her young life. "Oh, that's not necessary," my father said, moving away from his conversation with Uncle Antonio and intercepting us near the front door. "I can put your things in the car for you. Why don't you and Valentina just relax and enjoy the party?" But Marcus was already reaching for the door handle. "Thanks, Giuseppe, but I've got it. We'll be right back." And then my father did something that confirmed every terrible suspicion that had been building in my chest for the past 5 minutes. He stepped directly in front of the door. Not casually, not accidentally, but deliberately, blocking our exit with his body while maintaining that same friendly, concerned expression that had been fooling me my entire life. "I really think you should stay," he said, and for the first time, I heard something in my father's voice that I'd never heard before. Something cold and calculating, and completely unlike the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had walked me down the aisle at my wedding, who had cried when Sophia was born. The room behind us had gone completely silent. No more conversations, no more laughter, no more clinking of plates or shuffling of feet. Just the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears and Sophia's soft breathing against my shoulder. Marcus looked at my father for a long moment, and I saw something pass between them, some kind of understanding or recognition that I wasn't part of yet, but desperately needed to be. I see, Marcus said quietly. Well, in that case, I think Valentina and I need to have a conversation about what's really happening here. And that's when I knew that my husband was right. Something was very, very wrong at Grandpa Benedetto's 90th birthday party, and whatever it was, my entire family was in on it. The question was, were we about to become victims, or had we already been victims all along? What happened next still haunts me, but not in the way you might think. Marcus looked my father dead in the eye and said, "Giuseppe, I know what this is about. The question is whether Valentina knows." My father's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, calculation, and then something that looked almost like relief. "You figured it out." "Figured what out?" I demanded, my voice rising despite Sophia still sleeping in my arms. "What is everyone talking about? What is going on?" That's when Grandpa Benedetto himself shuffled over from the kitchen, his cane tapping against the hardwood floor. At 90, he moved slowly but with purpose, and when he reached us, he looked directly at me with those sharp blue eyes that had seen 9 decades of life. "Mia cara," he said gently, "sit down. There are things we need to tell you." "I don't want to sit down," I said, backing toward Marcus. "I want to know why my father is blocking the door and why my husband looks like he's seen a ghost." Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. "Val, 3 weeks ago, I got a call at work from someone claiming to be your cousin Matteo from the Chicago branch of the family." I frowned. I had dozens of cousins, but I'd never heard of a Matteo in Chicago. "Okay." "He wanted to know about your schedule, about Sophia's daycare, about our routines. Said he was planning a surprise for Grandpa's birthday and wanted to make sure we'd be here. I thought it was weird, so I did some digging." My stomach was starting to churn. What kind of digging? The kind where I discovered that there is no cousin Matteo, and that 3 different private investigators have been asking questions about you around Millbrook Heights for the past month. The room had gone completely silent again, but this time it felt different, less threatening, more ashamed. Uncle Salvatore cleared his throat. "Marcus, maybe you should sit down too." "I'll stand, thanks." Grandpa Benedetto sighed heavily and looked around the room at his family, his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who had all gathered to celebrate his milestone birthday. "This is not how we wanted to tell you, Valentina." "Tell me what?" And then my mother stepped forward, tears already forming in her eyes. "Sweetheart, you're not in danger. You never were. But we hired the investigators." I stared at her. "You what?" "All of us," my father added quietly. "The whole family. We've been planning this for months." Marcus's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Planning what, exactly?" Aunt Francesca, who had been silent since her failed photo attempt, finally spoke up. "Valentina, do you remember when you were in college and you mentioned that you might want to write a book someday?" "Vaguely?" I was completely lost now. What does that have to do with anything? "You said you wanted to write about family stories," my sister Carmen said, stepping closer. "About our immigration history, about Grandpa's journey from Sicily, about how our family built a life in America." Grandpa Benedetto nodded slowly. "For months, we have been working together, collecting stories, gathering photographs, tracking down relatives you have never met. We wanted to give you everything you would need." I looked around the room in confusion. "For what?" "For your book," my mother said softly. "The one you never got to write because life got busy with marriage and babies and work." Uncle Antonio stepped forward, holding a thick manila envelope. "We hired researchers to track down relatives in Sicily, in New York, in Boston, people with stories you've never heard, documents you've never seen."
We've been planning this for 8 months, Aunt Francesca added, ever since you mentioned at Easter that you sometimes regretted not pursuing writing. Cousin Isabella smiled sheepishly. All those conversations today about fishing trips and hip replacements and football, we were stalling, waiting for everyone to get here so we could present this to you properly. I felt like I was in some kind of bizarre alternate reality. So, the strategic positioning? The blocking exits? My father looked embarrassed. We were trying to keep it a surprise. When you started to leave, we panicked. We've been planning this for so long, and if you left before we could present everything to you. The private investigators asking questions around town, Marcus said slowly, they were doing research for the book? Genealogy research, Uncle Salvatore confirmed. Immigration records, ship manifests, property deeds, everything going back 5 generations. Grandpa Benedetto reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an old, worn leather journal. This was my father's. He wrote in it every day for 60 years, starting from the day he left Sicily. I have been saving it for the right moment to share these stories. I stared at the journal, then at my family, then at Marcus. So, when you said something was very wrong, Marcus ran his hand through his hair, looking equal parts relieved and embarrassed. I thought they were planning to kidnap you, or Sophia. When I started putting together the surveillance, the mysterious phone calls, the way everyone was acting today, I thought we'd walked into some kind of trap. The room erupted in laughter, the real kind this time, full of relief and love and the special kind of hilarity that comes from a massive misunderstanding. "Oh, sweetheart," my mother said, wiping tears from her eyes, "we just wanted to give you your dream." Sophia finally woke up, blinking sleepily at the room full of laughing adults. She looked around, saw all the smiling faces, and clapped her little hands together like she was applauding the whole ridiculous situation. 3 hours later, I sat at Grandpa's kitchen table surrounded by 5 generations of family history. Photos, documents, stories, and that precious leather journal filled with my great-grandfather's careful handwriting in a mix of Italian and broken English, chronicling his journey from a small village in Sicily to the bustling streets of Millbrook Heights. Marcus was right. Something had been very, very wrong at Grandpa's 90th birthday party. What was wrong was that I'd spent 32 years not knowing just how much my family loved me. 6 months later, my book, Letters from Sicily, 5 Generations of the Moretti Family, became a local bestseller. But more importantly, it gave me back something I didn't even know I'd lost. The knowledge that sometimes, when your family is acting suspicious, it's because they're planning something wonderful. Trust your instincts, but also trust your family. And if you're lucky enough to have both pointing in the same direction, hold on to that feeling forever. What's the most elaborate surprise your family has ever planned? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the beautiful chaos of family life.